I was the Bitcoin guy, I was this guy, and I guess I still am, but that was the first time I ever got up before a judge to do my first court case. I was a lawyer. And the law is a noble profession, and there's a lot of good stuff to do there, but I didn't feel like I was making the impact that I needed to. So while I was starting out fresh as a newly graduated law person, I built something. It was a machine that mines Bitcoin. So I can already see the looks on your faces right now. What the heck is Bitcoin, right? It's a good question. So the most important thing you need to know about Bitcoin is that it's open source, which means that anyone can take a look at it, the code underlying it, inspect it, make something else, which is it spawned millions of other coins, well, hundreds of other coins like it out there. It's secure, which means if you remember back to around the holiday shopping season, when Target got hacked and 70 million people's credit card information got compromised, that could never happen with Bitcoin. It allows you to send money anywhere in the world, so if I were to send somebody a tip for coming to watch me tonight, or if I were to send money to Africa, it really wouldn't make a difference. It would get there in the same amount of time, which is pretty much immediately. Bitcoin's value is determined by supply and demand. We all get how that works, but that means that there's some volatility. What you might not know is that your business can accept Bitcoin without actually being exposed to this volatility. And there's some companies out there who assume and mitigate that volatility risk. And we can talk more about that if you're interested. Lastly, transactions for Bitcoin are recorded in this giant spreadsheet called a blockchain. And every computer out there, if you've heard the word mining Bitcoin, is basically just keeping a copy of that spreadsheet and updating it accordingly to all the transactions that are out there. So I started to think this is the future, but I didn't know how to get involved. I applied to a couple of different Bitcoin companies that existed, but I didn't really get a good response, mostly because a law degree doesn't teach you how to code. So I did some soul searching. I found out about this thing called Starter School. And it made me kind of reflect back on this quote from Steve Jobs. And really the gist of it is that if you're going to be working on something, you have to absolutely love your work. You have to love what you do. And so I was faced to make this decision. Do I take the plunge and spend all this money and time when I perhaps should be making my way as a young lawyer in the world? And I met with this guy, Mike McGee. And he was telling me a little bit about this program, Starter School, that they were starting here in 1871. And he said something that made a lot of sense to me. He said, no one else can live your life. You have to be living the life. So I took the plunge. I decided to move out here and do this program. And I was wondering not just how to get involved learning software, but what did the Bitcoin community look like here? So I went to a Bitcoin meetup at a mall. It was in a food court. I was one of 11 sketchy dudes, and if you're one of those sketchy dudes, I'm sorry, I was one of them too, so I'll say it. And we were just discussing Bitcoin in a food court, and it was kind of depressing. So I wondered, how could I get people more excited about this? One of my instructors here at Starter School and I did some brainstorming. We came up with this idea, beer and Bitcoin. And we moved the Bitcoin meetup from a place like this to a place like this. This was January 7th, 2014. It was the beginning of our second semester here at Starter School. And that's the Atlas Brewing Company in Lincoln Park, and it was packed with people. So since that time, the Chicago Bitcoin meetup has evolved from about 32 members to over 600. And I'd like to think that I've had something to do with that. So I started learning about this place, and I'll tell you the story how this all turned out, how we got to January 7th with all these people packed into a crowded brewery to talk about Bitcoin. I started learning. I learned some Ruby on Rails. I learned some front-end technology, thanks to Jeff and Sandy for teaching us all this valuable stuff. And I learned about design. I learned that design is all about words. And if you build a website and there's no words on it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So here's something to illustrate this point. Here's something I built, and here it is without words. You need words on a website for it to make any sense. Another thing I learned was to design mobile first, because if you can't fit everything that you're designing on one screen, then maybe it doesn't have a reason to be there in the first place. And if you're designing something to appear on a mobile screen, perhaps that the things that you can fit there are what's most important, and that's what you should focus on. I learned to iterate, and not just to iterate through data from a database, but to iterate on myself, and to iterate on my own product, and to not be afraid to change my behavior if I learn more about the problem that I'm trying to solve. I learned that natural law still applies to great ideas, and that you could have the most awesome open source project in the world, but if it's not bringing in any revenue, it's not a business, it's just an awesome open source project. I learned about working remotely, and I learned one really great reason to work remotely. It's because when you work around people that you have a lot of fun with, sometimes you have more fun than getting things done, but that's productive in its own way too. So, okay, but did I build anything? Well, yes, I did. So, back to that night at Atlas. Here's my very first Ruby on Rails app that I built that people actually used. It ran on an iPad, and it let you do a couple of very simple things. The waitress could type in the amount that somebody owed, and they would be presented with a QR code. People who know how to use Bitcoin know what to do with the screen, I promise you that. And it would give you some sort of confirmation that the payment has been received. It was a great time, and the owner of the bar really enjoyed it. He enjoyed the extra money he got on a cold Tuesday night, because this is what it was like outside, if you remember back to January. But inside, it was nice and cozy, and people were talking about Bitcoin. So this got me thinking, what would a Bitcoin events app look like? So I turned to my trusty friend Photoshop, and I mocked out some words on a drawing to see what this would look like. But then I was reminded of this whole concept to iterate on what I already had. So I took my existing design, and I added the functionality to buy tickets for an event with Bitcoin. And I actually sold 30 tickets, but there was about 100 people who ended up coming to an event where we brought a notable Bitcoin speaker, Andreas Antonopoulos, to come present at Big Bricks, which is a bar up in North Park. It was really cool because when I was making that decision to come to Starter School, I was listening to this guy's podcast, and now he was reaching out to me. He wanted to come speak at my event. I thought that was awesome. None of that would have been possible without Starter School. So here's a picture of what it looked like inside. 100 people were actually there. It was amazing. We may have even broken some laws with the amount of people you could have in a room. But what I found after doing all this is that people really wanted to talk to me about Bitcoin. I was featured in the Red Eye. I appeared on a radio segment at WGN 720. I was in an international Bitcoin publication called CoinDesk, and I got to appear at the Flourish conference where I sat on a panel beside open source visionaries like Greg Bages and Ray Hightower, who runs the Windy City Rails conference. And here, people wanted to hear from me about Bitcoin. So talk about imposter syndrome here. I was even asked to go talk to some undergraduate students about Bitcoin in a DePaul money and banking class as well. So I made this stuff work, but now I wanted to make it better. So I redesigned my homepage, this will be launching soon, and I started thinking about some of the other things that I learned, like AngularJS, front-end technologies like jQuery. I wanted to make a single-page application. So I built this point of sale. It runs totally off any web browser on mobile. It's skeuomorphic, which means that it feels like when you push the buttons, they actually push down. And it delivers what you need to do for Bitcoin transactions, the QR code, except this time, instead of making API calls to Coinbase, I was handling all this myself with JavaScript in the browser. In case you're wondering if anybody would be interested in using this kind of technology, there is actually a restaurant up in Lakeview that accepts Bitcoin right now, and it seems that it's hot on the tails of some other popular payment methods. So what's next for me? I built some stuff, and a lot of it was an experiment to learn more about how to code, and particularly how to code on Bitcoin projects. But right now I'm discussing going to work for some notable Bitcoin companies right now. But I'd like to stay in Chicago. I really like it here. I've fallen in love with this city. And if anyone out there has a Bitcoin idea that they're just not sure about, I'm probably the person who can help you execute. So let's chat. Let's grab coffee sometime. Thank you for being here.